Hello, everybody. This is Alex Sherlockman with Telrad. People are joining in. We're going to give it a few minutes to pack the room, if you will, and we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. Alex Sherlockman with Telrad. Just a quick note that we're still waiting for people to join in. Maybe another 1-2 minutes, and we're going to get started. Okay, I think we can get started. Thank you again for joining our first of the series webinar, CBRS series webinars. My name is Alex Sherlockman. I'm a director of sales for Telrad. Our panelists today, a person joining the webinar and doing the second half, the heavy lifting part, is Michael. He is with Federated Wireless. As you know, Federated Wireless is a major contributor into the CBRS success. And I want to make sure that Michael will be able to present the value, reasoning, and talk a little bit about the technology behind Federated Wireless. We're going to have a couple polls in the process. If you have any questions, please raise hands and type questions in the chat, and I should be able to address them as we go with presentations. So I'll take maybe about 10 minutes to talk a little bit, give a quick refresher about Telrad, and the rest of the time, probably about 20-30 minutes, will be Mike's, and after all, we're going to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. On that note, we can get started. So just a quick refresher who Telrad is. We are a 67-year-old company. We have been in Israel. We've been established with an Israeli-based company established in 1951. Pretty much the first technology firm in the state of Israel since its inception. In North America, we do have in excess of 300 networks. Some of that legacy, some of that WiMAX, and many of them are LTE. Globally, there are over 4 million CPEs deployed in over 150 countries. So that kind of gives an idea that we've been around for some time and do carry quite a series of portfolio of intellectual property and know-how of building fixed wireless networks. So every product that we offer today are built around the same concept: is technology that is a forward-looking technology, stays on the tower longer, gives you better bang for a buck, if you will, and allows you to build better quality networks. Some of our customers, bigger customers in North America, some of the names that may be familiar to you, maybe not, but these are our success stories. Every single one of you that our existing customer today is our success story, but some of the success stories are a little bit bigger in size, and we do value and appreciate everybody's business. Application, where we fit. As you know, our technology is an LTE-based technology, so very often people start thinking, oh, well, it's coming from mobile world, how well is going to work for fixed? And this is where we come in very strong with a good value proposition where we say, yes, because we're coming from fixed wireless broadband space, the know-how of building fixed wireless networks is second to none. With that, exactly the same know-how of building, legacy networks, WiMAX, was brought into the LTE, and some of the software features, some of the technology incorporated into the existing LTE portfolio provides us ability to build really cool LTE networks. Applications can be anything. It can be anything from residential to municipality, delivering bandwidth to rural areas, as many of you use. And the big question is, do we support mobility? No, we do not. Even though LTE comes from a mobile world, we do not support mobility. I like to call it nomadicity, but it's not mobility. So that's a big differentiating element between us and other players that provide technology for mobile carriers. A little bit about our portfolio. So our LTE portfolio consists of 4 main components. It starts obviously with something that goes on the tower, but it's a little bit more than that. It starts with an EPC, Evolved Packet Core. In our case, EPC comes in 2 flavors. It can be embedded into the base station, and we call it LTE in a box, or it can be an external appliance. Obviously, we offer a variety of base stations, and the most popular one available in CBRS frequency band. We have a variety of CPEs, anything from category 4 to category 12. And a most important piece of the puzzle that makes things, it ties things together and makes it work. And the reason why we're able to transition into the CBRS without a forklift is BreezeView, our network management platform. With transition to CBRS, BreezeView becomes our domain proxy server, and it allows us to software migrate all of our CBRS, all of our Compact 1000 networks into CBRS. So for every existing customer of ours that purchased equipment in the past 4 or 5 years, for them, as long as it's an LTE system, for them it's a software path into CBRS. Some of the unique capabilities of our gear. Base station can be deployed 6 different ways. It's a little bit unusual. You usually buy a product that kind of fits the application, then you buy another product that fits another application. In our case, with different variations of licenses, you can have a base station that will fit low density markets, and you can have the exact same base station that can fit high density markets or high capacity markets, depending what you're trying to achieve. And that's the beauty part of Telrad. Essentially, you're going to be keeping one SKU on the shelf as a spare if you need one. It's a little bit different, it's unusual, but it works really well with our distributors and our customers. A little bit about our portfolio. So the most popular base station, as I mentioned, is called Compact 1000. It's available in 3.5 gigahertz. We've been shipping exactly the same product since 2015, basically. Initially, it's been available for upper 50 megahertz, part 90. However, radio can cover almost 300 megahertz of spectrum. So with CBRS, we took it back through the FCC certification and got type approval, part 96 type approval. Got on-go certification. So now this base station is fully CBRS certified and can be used on CBRS networks. So now with exactly the same base station, legally you can operate in full 150 megahertz from 355 to 370, as long as you're operating under the CBRS umbrella. We have recently made an announcement about our 5 gigahertz. It's a new product. It's exactly the same LTE technology, except we did see a need for an unlicensed LTE. So we have just recently introduced that. Base stations are already shipping, CPEs are on the way, so there is a little bit of shortage of that. But for customers that are looking to stay within the same LTE platform today, and tomorrow looking to possibly do inner band carrier aggregation, our 5 gigahertz platform will deliver very interesting and new capabilities, again, that will allow for equipment to stay on the tower longer. So a little bit of our, as far as CPE portfolio, we do offer a variety of CPEs. Our most common ones, the 8100 series and 9000 series, either category 4 or category 6 devices. We recently introduced category 12 CPE. The category 12 device, the CPE 12000, provides additional capabilities such as 4x4 as well as 2x6 QAM. All of the CPEs can work on the same sector at the same time, and that's the beauty part of LTE. It provides you very strong backwards and forwards compatibility. So one of the features that we will be we're preparing and we'll be making some additional announcements a little bit later in the year, early into next year, is base station chaining. Again, we're always going for CBRS is great, but the question is, can we maximize use of CBRS? And there is only so much you can do with 5.5 bits per hertz. Can we maximize the spectral efficiency? And the answer is yes. You can combine 2 base stations and take advantage of both, and carrier aggregation and MU-MIMO, thus providing, taking advantage of bigger chunks, accommodate more customers. In case if you're combining one CBRS base station and one 5 gigahertz base station, you'll be able to take advantage of inner band carrier aggregation. And if you have which later in the year will be introduced as well, a dual band CPE, 5 gig and 3 gig, you'll be able to grab 20 megahertz channel from CBRS frequency band, or 10 megahertz, whatever the channel width is, another channel from 5 gigahertz, and thus be able to deliver customers bigger packages, up to 200 megabits essentially. Total capacity up to 200 meg, so packages of 100 by 20 will be very, very doable. Now, and that's a little bit more about the dual band CPE. And on that note, I am done with our piece and would like to pass presenter mode to Michael, and he will be able to talk about a lot more interesting stuff than our hardware.
Right. I am loaded with interesting facts.
Hold on, Michael. I'm trying to figure out how you switch this to your.
Yep. All my time at the Citrix, I might not even be able to tell you this at this point.
There you go.
You should be able to go next to my name, make me presenter.
Yep.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
I will assume that that's a yes. All right, very good. All right, my name is Michael Ahrens. I am a Federated Wireless Field Operations Engineer. And basically what that means is I do my best to work with customers and equipment manufacturers such as Telrad to make to help embrace CBRS and make that embrace go as smoothly as possible. So I've put together some material here to provide a whirlwind tour through CBRS, and I'm going to get started right away with this information. Right off the bat, this is what everybody wants to know. Where are we in the evolution of CBRS? And what does this ICD thing mean anyway? So right now, we are in what I would call the first third of ICD, or initial commercial deployment. On September 16th, the FCC here in the United States gave SAS administrators the thumbs up to go forward with initial field trials of their technology. And that period is called ICD, or initial commercial deployment. And up to this point, all of our customers and partners, they have been doing whatever testing of CBRS they've done using STAs. Now no longer. We've been running our SAS in full Part 96 compliance mode since September 18th, just a couple of days after the FCC gave the public notice that ICD had begun. We understand that ICD may last in total between 60 and 90 days, the first 30 days of which is a compliance period. And all SAS administrators have to give some reporting to the FCC after those first 30 days. Then they need to take some time to review those results, and that could be an additional 30 to 60 days. So with all said and done, sometime in the November, December timeframe is when we expect to go full commercial. And 150 megahertz should be available everywhere except for places where spectrum is protected. We all know that the purpose of the SAS is to protect incumbents, and if we don't know that, we will certainly do so by the end of this half hour. Another thing that is on people's minds as well is PAL. When do I get the CBRS spectrum that I can actually treat as licensed? And it was just recently announced that in June of 2020, the FCC is going to hold Auction 105, and that will be auctioning off the first priority access licenses up to 70 megahertz, 710 megahertz channels in every county of the United States. That would be licensable for a 10-year term, conditional renewal, and the ability to resell basically create a secondary market for that spectrum. So that's where we are in CBRS. So that's the first thing that most people ask me. So now that that's done, we can actually get to some of the other content in the presentation. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to do a short bit about who Federated Wireless is. We'll talk a bit about why CBRS is compelling to customers and equipment manufacturers such as Telrad. Then we'll talk about the technology itself at a very high level, about what makes it tick. Then we'll talk about CPI training, and then a little bit about GAA coexistence. And then we'll break. So we're going to touch on these things pretty quickly. I have a fair number of slides. I will hit them generally conceptually, not necessarily point by point, just to keep the pace on time. So first, about Federated Wireless. Federated Wireless is one of the pioneers in shared spectrum technology. We are the leading neutral enabler of the shared spectrum ecosystem. And what that means is we have no designs on becoming a service provider. We have no designs on becoming an equipment manufacturer. Our role in the industry is to make others successful, right? Help people capitalize on CBRS. We have offices in Arlington, Virginia in the U.S., which is where I'm sitting right now. In addition, we have offices in Boston and in Silicon Valley. We're founding members of the WIN Forum and the CBRS Alliance, the two primary standards bodies, two standards bodies really in CBRS technology. And we are working to accelerate a very promising private LTE and 5G markets. In addition, we've recently announced another round of funding, bringing our total of funds invested, private funds invested to date to $126 million. And these are some of our investors, including some new ones. So it's an exciting time to be in CBRS. What do we make? We make the spectrum controller. And the spectrum controller consists of a spectrum access system, or a SAS. Everyone has heard that term, I would imagine. And that is a cloud-based system, fully telco-grade, cloud-deployed system, and cloud-scale system that manages the allocation of spectrum. We also have built from the ground up, with the collaboration and cooperation of the Department of Defense, our own environmental sensing network. And we have deployed somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 sensors around the coast of the United States, and their job is to help protect federal incumbents in the water. And just to reiterate, the job of the SAS right now is to protect incumbents. And I'll hit that point a couple of more times over the course of this half hour. We also have a spectrum planning tool, map, that shows where there are some protection areas, where there are some quiet zones, where CBRS or really any other type of radio can't be used. So that should help in planning where to deploy CBRS equipment, and it provides a view of how things are now and how things will look when Part 90 licenses start to expire in April 2020 if nothing changes. And we also have an online training program for CPIs, or Certified Professional Installers. So we'll talk a little bit more about that going forward. So why CBRS? What's CBRS making possible? Essentially, the CBRS is sort of the first foray into sharing spectrum for commercial use. And we're sharing it with federal incumbents, and therefore, since we're sharing it, some of it's being offered for free, right? So that's a good price. It's certainly less expensive than what folks are paying for spectrum nowadays. Once priority access licensing becomes available, then there will be some payment for spectrum, but for the GAA spectrum, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, that's all free. And that's enabling in-building deployments, private LTE, any place where Wi-Fi might be being used today but isn't necessarily cutting the mustard from a congestion standpoint or interference standpoint. There are many applications that just don't tolerate that well. So private LTE is a compelling solution there. We're also working with cable operators, saving them some money with MVNO offload, and helping them to create compelling offerings for private LTE, perhaps in the residence. MNOs, mobile operators, are looking at this technology for densifying their networks, adding additional capacity, doing carrier ag, and CBRS is going to be an enabler for 5G. And of course, to address Telrad's primary market here, wireless broadband is also a key use case in CBRS, right? And it certainly is a good investment for the United States as well, to basically bring more folks who are hard to reach onto the internet and provide them with access to all of the great stuff that's out there. Neutral host is also a use case in airports and campuses, apartments, arenas, any place where you've got a lot of folks around that may want to use their own carrier. This is a solution for that as well. So just again, another slide just talking about the various different private LTE applications. We see use cases in utilities and retail and in airports, smart offices, hotels. Really, any place you could use LTE today, there's a place for it with CBRS. And to just reinforce our partnership with Telrad here, one of the first forays into CBRS with Telrad, we're looking at a fixed wireless use case for residential and business in the central United States. All right, so with the use cases addressed, let's talk a little bit about how spectrum sharing works. How does the technology work? And what we have here is a depiction of the SAS. It's in the center, the spectrum access system, which we talked about before. This is one of the things that Federated Wireless brings to bear to support the CBRS ecosystem. On the right, we have various users of spectrum, some of which we just talked about in the various use cases, in arenas and in hotels, enterprises, retail, healthcare. And on the left, we have our sensor network, which we deployed around the coastal United States, that helps to protect against naval incumbents on the water. The way CBRS is actually used is one of these entities here on the right, one of these customers, attempts to get some spectrum. They register with the SAS and say, SAS, give me some spectrum. And the SAS looks at where the device is and the surrounding area and says, you know what, I can give you the spectrum you asked for. And it does that. It grants the spectrum and then allows the device to transmit. While the device is transmitting, it's on the air, it's doing its thing. At some point, a naval incumbent may approach the coastal United States where this radio is deployed. Say it's on the coast. The sensor network will detect that activity, and we will protect it by telling the radio that your right to use the spectrum is suspended, and then at that point the device would make use of other channels in order to stay on the air. So basically what we're doing is we're allocating spectrum and providing it to customers for their commercial use, and protecting incumbents, whether they're on the water or whether they're on land. And there are some land-based incumbents that we protect against, or we protect from CBRS. and allow all to share the spectrum. And what is the spectrum? Spectrum is its LTE Band 48. It runs between 3.55 gigahertz and 3.7 gigahertz. There are three primary classes of users, starting at the top with the incumbents. They are protected from all users. So first is the naval radar that we discussed. There are satellite services that operate in this band as well. They operate between 3,600 and north of 3,700 in some cases. Then there's the Part 90 grandfathered wireless providers that typically operate between 3,650 or 3.65 and 3.7. Then priority access licenses will be the spectrum that entities can purchase at auction starting in June, and they will be protected from GAA users, which are at the bottom of this hierarchy. TAL users, as they're called colloquially, will be granted up to, they will be able to get in any one county up to 70 megahertz in any one county. And any one particular entity can own up to 40 megahertz in that locale. And then at the bottom of the hierarchy are the general authorized access. So this is free access to the spectrum. They can use any spectrum not in use. So basically, if there are no PAL users and no incumbents in a particular geography, then the whole 150 megahertz is available for use. Anyway, that's an overview of how the CBRS spectrum is shared. CBRS devices are referred to as CBSDs, and there are a couple of different categories that are defined by the WIN Forum. There's a Category A device and a Category B device, and they each have separate requirements. Category A's can be either indoor or outdoor. They can operate up to 30 dBm per megahertz. That's the maximum EIRP they're allowed to register with the SAS with. And then there are Category B CBSDs, and they can only be used outdoors, and they can go up to 47 dBm per 10 megahertz. And they require the use of a certified professional, or they require a certified professional installer to sign the parameters that are used to configure them. And in reality, we'll see in a little bit that really CPIs are going to be necessary for just about any radio. And then for those applications that require end-user devices like handsets and little MiFi hotspots, are end-user devices that operate below 23 dBm. They don't have to talk to the SAS at all, but they do have to communicate with a CBSD that does talk to the SAS. So just on this slide, you'll see some of the other criteria for what makes a Category A and a Category B radio. As we talked about before, the purpose of the SAS is to protect incumbents. That is job one. And our key incumbents are the Department of Defense, in particular the Navy. They operate a number of aircraft carriers, up to 19 of them. And they could be along the coastal United States at any point. And if they are in those waters and using their radar, we can't interfere with them. And the SAS is designed to ensure that no CBSD does interfere with them. In addition, inland, there are satellite operators. We talked about those, wireless internet service providers, Part 90 providers, radar sites, FCC offices, things like that have requirements to protect them from interference from CBRS devices. Just to talk a little bit more about what happens on the coast, as we talked about a few slides ago, Federated Wireless deployed a sensing network, an environmental sensing network, all down the coast of the United States, all around, I should say. These offshore regions and coastal regions are defined or divided into dynamic protection areas, DPAs. These are defined by the government. We monitor these DPAs with our sensing network. And when we detect activity from an incumbent, if a ship sails into any one of those squares that you could see along the coast, we pick it up and we let the SAS know that there is a ship there. And we direct CBSDs to stop transmitting on any channels that might interfere with the operation of those ships. And the protection areas extend inland, sometimes up to 500 kilometers inland, really depending on the contour of the coast. So our spectrum planning tool actually shows you how those protection areas map out along the coast. And I've mentioned protection a few times because job one of the SAS, as I've said, is to protect incumbents. One other more extreme form of protection is exclusion. And exclusion is basically the complete unavailability of spectrum or piece of spectrum, or even the whole 150 megahertz in some cases, under some conditions. So there's the NRAO, that National Quiet Zone out on the border of Virginia and West Virginia. It's a big rectangle out there that has a lot of sensitive equipment that's used for astronomy and weather purposes, and nobody can transmit there. And we protect those as well. In addition, in cases where grandfathered wireless providers are within 40 kilometers of a satellite, we protect the upper 50 megahertz from 3650 to 3700 megahertz. We basically make that unavailable for anyone for 150 kilometers around that satellite. So that's what we mean by exclusion. And just to reiterate, in April of 2020, when the licenses for Part 90 providers start to expire, we'll see fewer of those exclusion zones, and they'll just become protection zones. And protection zones, in a lot of cases, they just mean that you can operate, but your power might be limited. Right? So that's exclusion and protection, two mechanisms that are in place that help keep incumbents free of interference from CBRS devices. And this map actually is a screenshot from our spectrum planning tool that I mentioned before. And here you can see where along the coast, the red lines extending in for protecting incumbents from transmission by Category B radios. The black dotted lines around the coast and around some of the inland areas are the Category A boundaries. And the big circles, those are exclusion areas where there are grandfathered wirelesses in proximity to a satellite. And therefore, the upper 50 is excluded. Right? So this map shows how this all lays out geographically, and you can see all the little blue dots. And if you zoom in on the spectrum tool, which you can zoom in really close, you can see that those are all polygons for Part 90 providers. And after April 2020, when those licenses start to expire, those areas will start to disappear, and you'll wind up with a more uniform, darker blue covering the country, uniform distribution of spectrum without all these holes in it. And the spectrum tool gives you a good picture of that. And the different colors on the spectrum tool mapped to the amount of spectrum available in that geography. And then finally, about the technology, the way that this all works, the way that the SAS is able to control the behavior of the radios is through a WinForm defined protocol. It's a simple request response protocol, not that many messages. It's pretty straightforward. Allows the CBSD to talk to our SAS, to register to it, to request a grant of spectrum, and then once they've got it, to keep alive on it. So that's really all I'll go into on the SAS to CBSD protocol. But it's a communication protocol that operates between the CBSD and where our SAS is in the cloud. So those are the nuts and bolts of CBRS and what it's supposed to do, and a little bit about how it works. Of course, that's just scratching the surface. Changing gears, want to talk about our Certified Professional Installer program. CBSDs require a CPI to digitally sign the installation parameters for any, according to the rules, for any Category B radio, any outdoor radio, or any Category A radio with and also for an indoor Category A where the device can't really self-locate through GPS. The CPI has got to digitally sign the installation parameters such as the maximum EIRP, the azimuth, the antenna gain, the height. All of those parameters that control the operation of the radio need to be digitally signed by a CPI, basically attesting to the fact that indeed this certified installer set this radio up properly. Practically, though, the reality is that pretty much any CBSD needs to have a CPI sign the parameters, since, regardless of the category of the radio, since many radios just can't self-locate. So once you can't self-locate, you need to have the CPI sign the parameters. So how does one become a CPI? You don't have to climb poles to do it. You just have to understand how radios work. And the process to do it is you could come to Federated Wireless and sign up for our CPI training program. And what it is, it's an online course that lasts about 5 to 6 hours to go through all the material. And these are the different modules. And Module 1, the Introduction to CBRS, goes into much greater detail on CBRS than I went through here, as well as all of the other modules. We are a WinForm accredited program. We have a test that's populated with WinForm design questions, and we can notify the test taker immediately upon completion of the test, whether they passed or they need to take it again. And then after they pass the test, they get a digital certificate from our CA provider, which is in this case Insta for us. And then once they get the digital certificate, then the CPI can go and sign parameters for any CBSD, for any organization they are representing. So that's a bit about our CPI training program. And finally, one word on coexistence, right? The term coexistence can mean many, many things to many, many people, but I just want to define what it is in the context of Federated Wireless and CBRS, right? And when we talk about coexistence, we mean GAA coexistence, users using the GAA spectrum. So it's best illustrated with an example. So I'm showing here a picture of downtown Chicago. And each of the large rectangles represents an outdoor provider, somebody with a lot of Category B base stations covering a geography. And in addition, the circles that are surrounded in gold are indoor deployments. They could be or low power deployments. They could be outdoor hotspots or private LTE or consumer cables, so running LTE off the cable box, or private LTE or IoT applications in some factory. They are, they may have many radios. They're typically not at very high power. So the way coexistence works, and I'll just talk about coexistence in the sense of federated wireless really controlling the whole 150 megahertz in a geography, right? So just to make the point, the way it works is where there is interference between all of these different users, we can break the spectrum up into 5 chunks of 30 megahertz. So basically, if you look in the middle here where I'm tracing with my cursor, and you can see the number 2. Let me see if I could bring up the laser pointer here, right? So if you look in this area here, right here, you've got everybody interfering with everybody else. So in this spot right here, you're going to have every different provider. Every different one of these colors here is going to have 30 megahertz to play with. However, if you come out here, right, and you come out here, these two different devices, they have the entire 150 megahertz available to them. They're not interfering with each other. They're not interfering with anybody else. In this location, you have right over here, this number 3, this outdoor hotspot might be interfering with the blue provider here. So they would share the spectrum 75 megahertz and 75 megahertz. So the way it works out, that we orthogonalize the spectrum. We basically break it into discrete chunks according to a method related to the number of potentially interfering parties in a given geography. So coexistence becomes a concern in areas where there's going to be a lot of different deployments. And coexistence, the features surrounding them will evolve, right? So coming out of the gate, the way coexistence looks today it will evolve and become more sophisticated as more entrants start deploying CBRS around the country. Anyway, with that all said, I'm going to turn control back to Alex, and we can move on with the next section of the talk.
Thank you, Mike. So we do have quite a few questions, and I would like to kind of quickly read some of them, and some of them are for you, and some of them I can answer. So, question from Brian: how will the SAS handle operating the CPE devices as Class B CBSD? How will SAS coordinate the frequency adjustments between the INO-Ds and CPE Class Bs, and if it's required?
So if I understand the question, it's how are the categories defined? Is that basically the question?
How will the SAS handle operating CPE devices as Class B CBSDs?
How will it handle them? So when the CBSD registers, right, it registers with information about itself. It reports its location. It reports which way it's pointing. It reports its maximum EIRP for 10 megahertz, right? And it can do that. It doesn't have to, but in case it doesn't, we also have the access to the authorization database from the FCC, and we will check because every device using CBRS has to be certified by the FCC. So we will check what power range that device is in, right? So if it's north of 30 dBm per 10 megahertz, it's a category B. So basically that's how we handle them. And in order to properly register a CBSD with that is a category B, we will enforce the use of signed parameters. If there are no signed parameters coming in on the registration, we won't register it. So category A's, they have different power limitations, but really there's nothing that says I'm a category A or category B radio when you take it out of the box. The radio operates at a certain power level, and based on what that device has been certified to run, that's what dictates its treatment. Does that answer the question?
Good question. I don't know. Brian, so just in case, if we did not answer your question fully,
send a note.
Please, send a note offline and we will address that. Question from Nicole. Can you discuss what would happen to SAS and spectrum availability if FCC grants petition for the transition of Part 90 to Part 96 devices?
Alex, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that. It's a little hard to hear you.
Can you discuss, well, it's more a regulatory question, I think. Can you discuss what would happen to the SAS and spectrum availability if FCC grants petition for the transition of Part 90 to Part 96 devices?
Okay, so this is all speculation on my part, but the way I would see it operating is how it's operating now, because we are protecting Part 90 today. So if 90 devices today, so if there is an extension, I would expect that the landscape for spectrum would be as it is right now. But that's speculation on my part.
Okay. Question from Bob. After SAS provides one of the GA channels, how do you lose it?
Well, so that's a good question. The way you lose it, there are a few ways. First is if you relinquish it, that's number one. So one of those protocol messages that wasn't on the slide was actually a grant relinquishment. So you can actually give up the spectrum. You could not transmit a heartbeat for 7 days, right? Grants expire automatically after 7 days. So basically, if you have a grant for 7 days and you don't renew it, which renewal can be done via the communications protocol I illustrated. If you don't renew it, the grant will expire after 7 days. So, most folks, I think, will get a grant, and once they get a grant, they heartbeat on it, and at some point, the CBSD will say, hey, you know what, I'm getting close to my 7-day expiration of this grant. I'm going to send a renewal and then renew the grant. And that's how you keep it. And by not doing that is how you lose it. Another way of, I guess, I'll go into this question or answer a little further and say, you may not lose it, but you might be suspended for a while from using it in case an incumbent makes an appearance. So if an incumbent appears and could potentially be interfered with by a device, the SAS will direct it to get off that channel. And at that point, the CBSD can go look for another channel.
But that would be applicable only in coastal areas, basically.
Not really, because in some cases there are like military installations in the middle of the country that basically look like a Navy ship coming in. But what they do is they schedule their unavailability, right? So when a site like that comes on air and starts doing its thing, at that point we notify devices that are in proximity. So it's the same basic rules that apply. If the device is transmitting, we can't interfere with it. So it's along the coast or within proximity of an inland DPA. But that doesn't make you lose the spectrum. It just suspends you from using it while the incumbent is using it. And then when the incumbent is done, you get the spectrum back. But taking the incumbent out of the equation and just looking at spectrum management in general, it's the grant. A grant on spectrum is good for 7 days, and you can renew it once you have it.
So the follow-up to the same question: what happens if a CBSD Class B comes online, requests a grant, and no spectrum is available? What happens?
No spectrum is available. Well, then the device will be registered, that's for sure. But if there's no spectrum available, its request for a grant will be either rejected or it will stay suspended for overnight to see maybe a better power calculation could be used to get spectrum. I mean, it's quite honestly a scenario that I have not really seen yet.
Okay. How long grandfather providers protected for? So currently, the answer is until April 2020. This is the sunset for the current Part 90 rules. Answer from Joshua. Yes. So everybody that installed CPE has to be certified. Yes. Everybody that's installing high power device over 30 dBm CBRS device has to be CPI installer. Does CBRS and SAS work in agreement with Canada? At the moment, Curtis, at the moment CBRS is only applicable to United States. How will SAS deal with WiMAX deployments that no longer, those gonna have to be our existing, for example, WiMAX deployments that are running on Compact, they're gonna have to be migrated to LTE. CBRS is only, our software is only supporting CBRS for LTE. Question from Stacy. Has the pricing model for SaaS services been announced by Federated? Stacy, let's take this question offline. The answer is yes. If you don't mind reaching out offline, we will talk. We can talk about the pricing. Alan, to answer your question, which UEs are currently certified, CBRS certified? So as of today, we have 2 of our UEs, 8100 and 9000, waiting for FCC certification, which should happen any day now. So again, all devices with the first wave, all of the 8100s and 9000s will be CBRS certified. With the second wave, we will have the rest of the portfolio, 7000s, 8000s, and 12,000s coming in. The expiration date for Part 90 sunset is April 2020. I don't remember exact date. I think it's like April 20th or 22nd of 2020. It's basically next year, 6 months from now. Will CP 8000, 7000? Yes. So CP 7000, 8000 will be compatible. We are planning to get Part 96 certification for the 7,000s, 8,000s, and 12,000s within the next 2 to 3 months. Edgar, your GMF example uses 30 megahertz for each entity. Is 30 megahertz limit per county or base station or something else? Mike, this question for you. Why 30 megahertz?
Why 30 megahertz in what context?
In your example, you had 30 megahertz chunks divided up in multiple
I'm going to bring that slide up again real quick just to make sure it's clear. Okay. Can folks see it?
Yes.
Okay. So only in this area right here, you can see that everybody is interfering with each other. So you've got the black provider, the magenta provider, the red provider, the blue provider, and the gold provider, all in this one area. They're all interfering with each other right here. So there's 150 megahertz to split up, and you got 5 ways of doing it, so 30 megahertz per. In this geography, right? If you go here, right, there's only interference between 2 providers. You've got this indoor and you've got this outdoor. So it's 150 megahertz divided by 2. So that's the general approach to splitting up spectrum.
So basically, the general rule, if I understand correctly, the logic is just equally divided between number of parties.
Equally divided between the number of parties who could interfere with each other. So you could have lots of parties in one area, like all of these, take away all the squares, just keep all of these gold things around, right? They're all in downtown Chicago. So you've got 3 different types of them, but they're all indoor, so they're not interfering with each other. If you take away all of these different colored squares and throw them out of the picture, each of them could theoretically have the entire 150 megahertz because they won't interfere with each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Edgar, hope we were able to answer your question. If not, we could take it offline. Interesting question from Rick. After the grandfather time period, will a CBSD transmitting at 30 dBm near an airbase be able to transmit at 47 with an 8 of SAS?
Is that question for me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, will the device be able to transmit at 47? I mean, if the device is capable of delivering 47 and it's near an airbase, and the conditions allow it, then why not? But otherwise, the SAS is going to control the power, so it might not get 47. It just depends on the terrain, the height, which way the radio is pointing. Is it pointing towards the airbase or away from it? So it's hard to just answer that question a priori like that.
Okay. Who is considered protected? Question from Nick. Who is considered protected? Are WISPs with current CBRS licenses considered protected? I think it's going back into one of your earlier slides between exclusion and protection zones.
Okay, so is who with the CBRS license being protected?
Who is considered protected? Are WISPs with current CBRS?
Yeah. Okay, who is protected? So federal incumbents are protected, right? That's the current or the main current focus of protection is the federal government. So that includes the Navy ships. It includes satellite services. It includes inland DPAs that we talked about, or basically inland areas that may go on the air at some for some period of time during the month. And grandfathered wireless providers are also protected. In addition, there's protection for and slightly different protection rules for quiet zones or geographies around FCC offices or other scientific locations that are outlined in basically in Part 96. But in general, think of it, the Navy and satellite providers and grandfathered wireless providers. And then once PAL users start using the SAS, then we'll protect PAL users from GAA as well.
Okay, one more follow-up question. Also, what happens when SAS is unreachable? What happens if heartbeat between domain proxy and SAS is down?
Okay, so first of all, the likelihood of that happening from a SAS perspective is very, very low because of the way that the SAS is designed. It's geographic redundancy. It's all built into the system, right? So the SAS is designed to not be unavailable. So if somebody cuts, all the wires between a domain proxy and a CBSD, a domain proxy and the SAS, then heartbeats aren't going to flow between, assuming that there was granted spectrum and the device had it, and the domain proxy can no longer communicate with the SAS. In which case, if the heartbeats wouldn't reach the SAS, so then basically the device or the spectrum would fall back into granted state. So basically the grant would not be lost, provided the circuit was fixed. Whatever damage to the circuit would be repaired before the grant expires in 7 days, right? If that's repaired and the device comes back up and can heartbeat again, then it'll just continue on its merry way.
So if there is no heartbeat within 60 seconds, does the radio has to go offline or it's still transmitting?
If there is no heartbeat, the heartbeat interval is longer than 60 seconds, right? It's right now we use a heartbeat interval of 200 seconds. That's what we recommend using. So if there's no heartbeat in that period of time, actually, and we add a little bit of extra to that, there's no heartbeat within really about 220 seconds. That's when the device will fall back into granted state. But in general, yeah, okay, I'll stop there.
All right, perfect. Next question from Matt. And I know we guys are bleeding into outside 1 hour slots, so I see people jumping off, but most are staying, so that's interesting. Question from Matt. How do you find out about auctions? So, Mike, can you share a little bit more information about auctions for next year?
I'll be honest with you. All I know is probably all everybody else knows, and that is the FCC announced that sometime in June of 2020 it's gonna do them. I'd actually direct you to the FCC.
Thank you. Question from Stefan. Understood these preliminary trends might be able to share about typical CPI skill set and experience. So typical CPI skill set and experience. Our traditional installers, that your traditional installers are there. I mean, you already have the proper skill set and experience. What you should remember is that each installer is going to be responsible for their own devices. And so you carry the liability for that. So you want to make sure that devices are installed properly, because that's the math and assumptions that will be used to calculate for SAS to work properly. Question from Curtis: how can we start preparing now to use GAA in November, December? So in November is probably going to be a little bit earlier, but if everything goes well, full commercialization, ICDs will be over around November. So around November, December. So the suggestion is to have a offline conversation with us, and we will start working with you, with your team, to upgrade the software, prepare BreezeView to communicate with SAS and so on. So it's a good time. We will need time, plus you will need time to get CPI certification. Question from Martin. Are there any category A CBRS devices in the market yet? I'm sure there are a bunch of, since for category A are operating under lower power, requirements are not as severe. There are already some phones even that you can use, that you can get with band 48. But I can't tell you any more than that, Martin. Okay, one question from Josh. Once grandfather rules expire, you cannot continue operating WiMAX unless it's going to have some sort of interface with Spectrum Access System. And our software is not going to support WiMAX, unfortunately. Oh goodness, more questions coming up. How about this? Let's because it's going to take, it's not going to end anytime soon. We've got 20 some more questions. What I would like to do, I would like to take it offline with everybody that asked questions and basically respond individually, separately to each one of you after the webinar. With that, I would like to thank you for attending, carving out an hour and 10 minutes of your time, and special thanks, Michael, for for your time and knowledge to share with the group. And if you guys have any additional questions, comments, please reach out to me, to Mike, if you have Mike's information. And his information was in the slides. It's all been recorded and will be available for offline review. On that, thank you again, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Alex. Have a good day, everyone.